Hi, I'm Nadia Jama, Labour NEC member. I'm pleased to welcome you to this event entitled Labour Conference Report Back and Next Step Discussion. So this event is hosted by Arise, a festival of Labour's left ideas and supported by a range of left organisations, campaigns and publications. So many thanks to everyone for coming along tonight. Tonight's event is the culmination of now 18 months of online events, forums, rallies and more that Arise have hosted or streamed, and they are looking forward to both online and physical events going forward, starting with their successful fringe at Labour Conference and now this discussion tonight. We all know that the Tories have had one of the worst responses in the world to the coronavirus crises, and they are using the pandemic to further restructure the economy in the interests of the super rich. Such a prospect means that Labour must rise to the challenges ahead, but instead we've seen most of the attention, particularly around our recent conference, focused on internal factional fighting and divisions by the leadership, as well as shamefully limiting our democratic choices in future leadership contests. And following a summer of discontent, the left have really suffered recently. The purpose of the event tonight then is to both review conference, including the important victories the left had on numerous policy issues, as well as the setbacks we faced, and to start the discussion around our strategy and next steps going forward. As well as the fight for democracy in our party, part of this must also be about providing the policy solutions to take us forward out of the crises we face, which is sadly lacking from the Labour's front bench. And that will allow us, hopefully, to take the fight to the Tories, but we're going to have to do that. I would also ask that you donate at the link provided so that Arise can continue hosting these important events, and please support the other campaigns and links that are put in the chat throughout the evening. Also, please note that captions are enabled on Facebook stream. Hopefully it'll be back at some point. I do obviously appreciate that it's currently down for some at the moment. So we have a couple of speakers this evening. We will give each of the speakers 10 minutes, and then we'll have a round of questions, which you can post in the Q&A function on Zoom. So please do that, and then obviously we'll get some answers from our panel as well. So our first speaker this evening is Rachel Garnham, who is the co-chair of Campaign for Labour Party Democracy and an ex-NEC member, the font of all knowledge when it comes to Labour Party rulebook. So over to you, Rachel.
Oh, thanks, Nadia. Yeah, 10 minutes to talk about a conference in which actually really quite a lot happened. So I'll try and rattle through it a little bit. And thank you to Arise for the opportunity to talk about what we've learned, what's changed, and in particular what we need to do next. So for me, there were three big takeaways. First, the current leadership is clearly completely incapable of putting forward the programme necessary to generate electoral support that Labour needs to form a government. It is incapable of fighting the Tories and building the coalition to win, and indeed the dishonesty of Starmer in completely disregarding the programme on which he stood for leader will come back to bite him, because why should anyone believe a word he says? I was talking to a colleague today who was asking where I'd been last week, and he describes himself as a swing voter in a swing seat. He'd seen the Marr show, and he said, you know, why did Starmer stand on a programme of renationalisation of energy, which is what we all need, and then say, no, I wouldn't do that. In reality, it's completely dishonest. The second takeaway, the sheer level of disdain that the current leadership has for its members, both individual members and trade union members, and that feeds into the inability to generate support to win a general election. Anyone who saw the way that Ian Hodson was dismissed by Margaret Beckett, well, and obviously leading so sadly to the decision to disaffiliate by the Bakers Union later in the week, can't help see that the current leadership just doesn't value us as a Labour Party, as members and trade unionists. And the third, more positive, the left may be down, but we are very, very far from out. And the energy, the connections, the determination to fight for what we believe in, for democracy, for socialism, it's still really very strong. And as we saw in the votes, but also in the speeches made by delegates, which were clearly the most inspiring part of conference, and on the fringe, the right is not winning any of the arguments in the party. The arguments were around why increasing the threshold for MP nominations to enter the leadership race would rebuild trust with voters were just bizarre. And an added point on the strength was the relationship between the left in the unions and the left in the CLPs is stronger than I've seen it in all my time in the Labour Party, and that has got to be a real positive. I think the only reason the leadership are winning is because they're not allowing us to have the open, honest and inclusive debate that Labour Party members want to see. So as we know, they're excluding and suspending active members for no good reason, including excluding left delegates right on the eve of conference, which, given how close the votes were in so many cases, really will have had an impact on some of the outcomes. And in particular, the number of left-wing Jewish people excluded from the party is striking and very, very worrying, I think. Obviously, they pushed pages and pages of rule changes, first on the NEC, so our NEC members didn't have proper time to scrutinise and build campaigns, and then on members and trade unions, no time to scrutinise, consult or draw attention to how dreadful the rule changes that have sadly gone through actually are. On the key CLPD rule change that we were campaigning around, which would hold political decisions by the chief whip in relation to the Parliamentary Labour Party to account, we had lies after lies after lies in the debate about this interfering with the disciplinary process. They knew perfectly well this was not true, but there was no right to reply. So we were not able to take the opportunity to restore the whip to Jeremy Corbyn, but that campaign has not gone away because Jeremy remains a Labour member, an MP, and must return if we are to have a successful Labour Party built on Labour's history of a broad church. So I've been asked to talk a bit more about the rule changes. I also want to touch on the policy agenda and what we do next. So the rule changes passed really narrowly in some cases, but they essentially try and reverse the gains we made as part of the democracy review changes 2 or 3 years ago. So as people have probably followed, we made it far more difficult for there to be a diverse choice of leadership candidates. 3 years ago, we were arguing whether it should be 5% of the PLP as the nomination threshold, and a compromise was reached at 10%, and now it's doubled to 20%. And that would have meant coronations for the likes of David Miliband and Keir Starmer, and the prospect, never mind the political diversity, the prospect of a woman or a black leader of our party is ever more distant if you look at the stats of what that would have meant in previous elections. We reduced the number of motions to be discussed at conference from 20 to 12, or 20 topics to 12, which will leave more time for those cosy sofa chats that seem to be creeping back in from the bad old days of the Blair conferences. It was quite clear that the debate at conference, where delegates got to speak, was the best of our movement, and the stage performers were really the worst. So I hope that our reps on the NEC and CAC will make sure members' voices still remain the majority of the conference, and I'm sure they will do their best to make that happen. This may have passed people by, but as a National Policy Forum geek, it was clear to me that after decades of reviews and complaining that the MPF is not fit for purpose, we made 0 reforms of any use that would bring the policy-making process closer to members. There are more trade unionists on the National Policy Forum, that is a good thing, but it won't be in any way more functional, and it'll still be used to undermine grassroots democracy and conference. We reversed the changes to local government committees so that regions can sign off whatever arrangements they like with their local cliques, continuing to exclude local members and trade unionists should they wish to. And people in many regions will know that more power in the hands of the regional office will not work in the favour of grassroots members. There were concerning changes under the membership, allowing the General Secretary to exclude new members for any reason at all, that will force elected reps to comply with some as yet unspecified code of conduct, which goodness knows what that will include. And there were changes that will limit which organisations CLPs can affiliate to, which no doubt is aimed at organisations like Jewish Voice for Labour and Peace and Justice Project and Palestine Solidarity Campaign, which they would prefer, the current leadership would prefer us not to be supporting, though many of us do at a local level. And worst of all, really, we've changed the disciplinary processes to remove democracy and accountability and put cases in the hands of so-called independent bodies who are in reality not independent, because they're appointed by the General Secretary, and this in no way actually fulfills what the HRC asked Labour to do. It's one to watch, though. Although it's not by any stretch independent, the lawyers appointed, we hope, will not particularly want their reputations trashed by being associated with decisions that go against natural justice. So, as so many decisions do these days, so we need to keep a close eye on it. So far so bad, and apologies for drawing people's attention to that, but I do think we need to recognise what's been done to us, you know, against all forms of democracy. But there are many glimmers of hope. People will have drawn attention to the rule change that will prevent NEC impositions of parliamentary candidates in the event of a snap election or by-election, which went against the NEC recommendation. I think that's massively unusual in a new leaders first conference, and a real sign of strength of what can happen when you reach out beyond the left to people who just want a say in their local MP. We have seen off the Electoral College for now, although we're promised it will return, and that campaign goes on. We've put in place a new Labour student organisation, which appears to be more democratic than the previous bastion of the right. I was rereading today the rule changes around the new disability and Black, Asian and minority ethnic structures that provide spaces for those members to organise, and really they're fantastic steps forward, commitments to a committee in each of these areas, to a conference for these categories of members, and they can really build on the success of Young Labour and of the women's organisation, to where we have, you know, the new Women's Committee chaired by the brilliant Ruth Hayes from Unite, really starting to make its presence felt already, and we can have a sort of levelling up as well around, you know, how we can get more members involved through those structures, how those structures can work together, and work with structures in Scotland and Wales as well, where there's clearly a lot more positive things going on. Secondly, on policy, sorry, I'm probably running out of time, so I'll rattle through a little bit. Obviously, a positive story to tell, good policy, Socialist Green New Deal, £15 minimum wage. They do not want to be listened to by the new leadership, and that's one more reason why the current leadership seems unsustainable, because they're popular policies made by members based in our communities. We know what you know, the concerns of ordinary people are. We're bringing them to conference, and we need to keep banging the drum for those. And then to focus very quickly on what we do next. Most immediately, there's a series of conferences this autumn and coming up in the spring to get organised for. Regional conferences where we'll elect regional executives, have an important role to play in local selections, where, again, if you've got the stomach for it, there are real opportunities to make a difference at a local level, but there's going to be a fight. We've got an Eastern Region conference coming up. I think they got a bit spooked when the left got organised, and now they've extended the deadline so that the right can do some catching up. For those in affiliated unions, obviously organising can make an awful lot of difference, and some of the key, if big unions had voted just on those rule changes just a little bit differently, it could have all been so different. We need to fight back against the unjust expulsions and exclusions, link members up together, make the point that attacking and culling your own membership is no way to win elections, and CLPD will be prioritising that in the coming weeks and months. We need to take the opportunities for political education, making connections. For example, this week again in our region, we're in Eastern Labour Left, we're hosting some speakers from North East Labour Left and hearing from Jamie Driscoll about socialist solutions in power and exchanging ideas for how we organise and defend the left regionally. Next year we'll have elections not just to the NEC but to the National Policy Forum, where we do have the opportunity to hold the leadership to account for the policies that we have made at annual conference. And it wouldn't surprise me at all if we had a leadership election sooner rather than later, as Starmer fails to attack the Tories and make any sort of electoral advances. From now on, only members with 6 months membership will be able to take part in leadership elections. So anyone who wants to vote, if it's next summer, rejoin now, or at very least sit tight. And this is a marathon, not a sprint. They can't fix every vote. They can't, they're not winning the argument. And so we still have many opportunities to fight back, and that's what we have to do. So as Nadia MP said in her assessment of conference for CLPD's Yellow Pages, the ordinary people of this country and internationally cannot afford to give up, so neither can we.
Thank you for that, Rachel. Amazing as ever. Really pinpointing all of the key things that we need to be aware of. I think the new structures is something absolutely that members can get engaged with. There is a lot of opportunity there, and having been involved in the Black, Asian, Minority Ethnic working group and the disabled working group, there's a lot of good stuff there. I think that we can start to make some difference for those members so their voices can start to be heard. And I think you're absolutely right. 6 months now to be involved in a leadership election. So it's really important that the left voices are still heard when that does happen, and it will happen. I think we can almost guarantee that now. And I think, I just wanted to kind of say the bakers, that was one of the real lowlights for me, I think, in this conference, the disaffiliation. My sister's a bakers member, and obviously they represent, lots of workers that have fought through the pandemic, to deliver services to people. So that was really gutting to see that. And hopefully that's, not forever. I think the FBU disaffiliated and came back. So hopefully there's hope in the future. But I think you're absolutely right. The discussions on the stage from the left are where all of the ideas are coming from. And it isn't a social club, it's a party, and we've got to stay in to make sure that our socialist agenda is heard. So thank you so much for that, Rachel. That was amazing. Okay, so I'm going to introduce my next speaker, which is the one and only Richard Burgon, my deputy leader. Over to you, Richard. Richard, are you available?
Yeah. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you? Thought we'd lost you there for a second.
You did briefly. But I heard all of Rachel's presentation, which was a delight to hear, a real shot in the arm. Dare I say, it was a forensic appraisal of the Labour Party conference. And thanks to Rise putting on this event. Now, it's great that Rachel's gone through every vote, every rule change that happened at conference. My analysis will be more general following that very particular vigorous run through she's given. I've come out of the conference feeling far more buoyed up and far more hopeful about the Labour left and our future than I felt I might do when I arrived at the conference. And that's not just on an emotional level, but that's true after attending all those fantastic left fringe meetings. You feel in a good mood, you feel energised, you feel buoyed up from seeing other left comrades. Also from objectively analysing what happened. And to put it into context, I think we should remember, those of us who have been around for long enough, that during Blair's entire tenure not just as Prime Minister, but as a Labour leader. So from 1994 to 2007, if I remember correctly, and Rachel can correct me if I'm wrong, on only one occasion did a conference vote go anything other than the way that Tony Blair wanted. And that was on the issue of pensions. I think that Unison brought a motion on public sector pensions. So well organised was the conference from the leadership and bureaucracy points of view in terms of political management. And so total was Tony Blair's command over the Labour Party, even though it was obviously significantly weakened after the Iraq War, that he never faced many problems in getting his own way with the votes on motions. So he suffered one reversal in conference motions between 1994 and 2007. And Keir Starmer must have suffered 6 or 7 defeats in the conference this week, and on important issues as well. So I think the death of the Labour left is somewhat exaggerated. It's wishful thinking by people in the right-wing media. It's wishful thinking amongst those on the right in our own party. I mean, look, for example, at the motion for a socialist Green New Deal. They stopped that even, they attempted to stop that even coming to conference. It got to conference and was passed overwhelmingly. Look at the issue, as Rachel's mentioned, of the policy of the £15 an hour minimum wage. That was passed, and I think the leadership felt it couldn't even whip, if you'd like, people to vote against it. So weakened was its position by then on that issue. And the Green New Deal policy included public ownership of the major utilities, and that was voted on the Sunday afternoon from memory, whereas on the Sunday morning, the Labour Party leader has said the Labour Party wouldn't support the taking into public ownership of these major utilities. Then the Labour conference in the afternoon voted it the other way. There's not a cat in hell's chance that when Tony Blair was Labour leader, that he'd have said something like that on the equivalent of the Andrew Marr programme, and then later that same day the conference would have voted the other way. And I think one of the reasons for that, actually, and I'm certainly not trying to have a hagiographic description of Tony Blair, but Tony Blair didn't stand for Labour leader on a misleading premise today. Tony Blair didn't stand for leader and say, oh, did you like the 1983 manifesto? I think it's really good too. I'm going to be just like that, but I'm going to be, I'm going to get elected this time. I'm going to present myself in a different way. I'm going to get elected. We're going to keep the core of those left-wing principles. Tony Blair didn't say that. He was clear about the trajectory that he wanted to take the Labour Party on. And I think that's one of the reasons that so many people who wouldn't class themselves as on the Labour left actually feel so let down by the current Labour leadership and were so willing to vote for important left policies during this conference because they feel let down as well. They look at those 10 pledges and they see them being dropped one after the other, whereas actually, in fact, during a crisis, those pledges, those socialist policies are actually more important and more applicable than ever. Looking more widely, even on international policy, which is often just seen as the interest of those on the most ideological left wing of the Labour Party, quite rightly, the vast majority of conference voted for, and therefore the motions were passed on the issue of Palestine. On the issue also, the emergency motion that was brought about AUKUS, about the new alliance between the USA, Australia, and the UK, which ushers in really a new Cold War against China, which we think is not only dangerous for world peace, not only gets in the way of international cooperation on important issues like climate change and dealing with refugee crises, but also actually takes away valuable resources from the government coffers that would be better used to build a national care service, to create a better society, to push forward with that green industrial revolution, and to not cut universal credit and not have a national insurance hike. So that was very welcome as well. A motion also passed that drew my attention, referred not just to the £15 an hour minimum wage, but also to a wealth tax something that the leadership hasn't been very specific on. And again, as I say, to public ownership as well. So actually, it was a good conference for the left in terms of what was in our control, because what certainly wasn't in our control was the speech that the leader of the Labour Party was going to make. What wasn't in our control was what the leader would say to Andrew Marr. And of course, as Rachel mentioned, that anti-democratic electoral college was well and truly defeated. And one of the most useful and most encouraging things about conference is we saw left-led unions working with left delegates from the CLPs. And in the past, I think we've seen a damaging level of mistrust or misunderstanding between the left in the unions and the left in the CLPs, with sometimes left CLP delegates seeing the unions as one homogenous role. Now, of course, we support trade unionism. It's vital in all its forms, but we also need to understand, and the left in the CLPs need to understand, that there is, just as there are different types of Labour MP and there are different types of conference delegate, also there are different types of trade union leadership. There are unions that are left-led, there are unions that are right-led, and so we shouldn't homogenise the unions in that way. And I think that obviously what's developing that's very interesting in the unions is in Unison, where the left majority executive committee of Unison, and I believe the left majority Unison Labour Link committee, obviously doesn't always share the views of the General Secretary of Unison on what position should be taken in relation to some of these votes at conference. So overall, I think we can be very much buoyed. You know, like others, I remember what life was like before the 12th of September 2015, before Jamie became leader of the Labour Party. And I think the Labour Party has changed irreversibly. I think the left is far stronger in the Labour Party than it has ever been, apart from between 2015 and 2019. When I used to go to the Labour Party conference before Jamie was leader, the left fringes were never as vibrant as this. We never used to win left votes. So people can take courage. Just looking at some of the fringe meetings, the Socialist Campaign Group rally, there was maybe 1,000 people there. People were staying in the party, were defiant, were upbeat, were ready to carry on getting stuck in to winning the socialist policies needed to deliver for our communities and for the working class majority and all its diversity during this crisis. The fantastic Tribune rally, the fantastic Young Labour rally, a rally which was not meant to take place if the party bureaucracy and the party leadership had its way. It took place, and I tell you this, all these people talk about forming new parties. There is no way that any new party or new organisation could have had a meeting as well attended by young people with as good politics as that and as good, defiant, a fighting spirit as that. The level of politics was high. People's spirits were up despite them being kicked around. Look at the attempts, look at the letter sent to the elected Young Labour chair, Jess Barnard, at 1 a.m, the week or so before conference, saying she's under notice investigation. That was, that was withdrawn. So I take, great encouragement from what happened at conference. Now, people will turn around and say, oh, well, the leadership won't go, oh, fair play, you've won the votes, therefore we will go forward with those policies. But I don't expect them to. People have got to get real about how our politics works, both inside the Labour Party and inside the form of democracy we have in our country as well. Things aren't always fair, but we're in a better position in this battle for socialist transformative policies than we were before the conference. And I think the only people who really believed that the Labour left was dead and irrelevant was a minority of the Labour left who left the Labour Party despondent. Actually, the right of the Labour Party know that we're still a hugely significant force. In fact, the most significant political force in left politics in Britain, which is why they did some of the things they've done, which is why we've been attacked so much. Nadia mentioned earlier, as did Rachel, the increase of the threshold in terms of the percentage of MPs to get on the ballot paper where there's a vacancy for leader. Now, of course, that's not welcome. However, it doesn't change anything in terms of where we are this moment. Before that was passed, 20 MPs were needed to get somebody on the ballot paper in a vacancy. Now 40 MPs are needed to get on the ballot paper where there's a vacancy. But before that was passed, for a challenge, you'd need 40 MPs. After that was passed, for a challenge, you still need 40 MPs. So in terms of the potential of the left and the options available to the left and to Labour MPs and the Labour Party membership and the Labour movement in general, the rule as it applies now in the current situation remains exactly the same. And of course, all of this reminds us of the importance to do the unglamorous work of getting as many left candidates selected to stand in Parliament as possible. That's always been the case. So I'm not despondent at all. I'm hopeful. The thing I'll end on is kind of saying a quick thought about where I think the left should view its own future. Now, people, it's a well-known saying, isn't it? That the task of the working class in general is to raise itself to the level of the ruling class. So that's true in terms of the whole of society. So in terms of inside the Labour Party, the task of the left is to raise itself to the level of leadership in the same way. And that means not being defined, in my opinion, by our position on internal Labour Party matters. The left used to lead the Labour Party not too long ago. We had in our sights taking state power, becoming the government in this country with a left-led Labour government. We nearly did it in 2017. So we can't allow ourselves to be reduced to people who are only defined by our opinion on internal Labour Party matters. Now, of course, we've got to react to any injustices which take place in our Labour Party. Of course, we've got to react when there are anti-democratic moves or when members are treated with disrespect or treated badly. We have to defend democracy in the party. We have to defend our members. But at the same time, we need to be propositional. We need to be getting out there with our policy proposals for how we would deal with this crisis if we're in the government now. We've got to get out there with our policy proposals on the kind of programme we think Labour should put forward, which can ensure we can win the next general election. And it's by doing that that we reach out beyond the left even to the majority of the Labour Party with policies that appeal to actually the majority in society as well. And I think there's a lesson from when Jamie was leader, actually. When people on a different wing in the party to us were waging internal warfare, having a go all the time, quite rightly, people didn't have very much sympathy with them other than the people in their section of the party. But when they alighted upon policy positions that held the support of the majority of Labour Party members and bigger swathes of the country, and suddenly they started to get a hearing. Now, I don't want to, revisit the Brexit debate, and obviously the majority of people who took the positions they took on Brexit did so because they believed it was the right thing to do, even though they had different opinions, and they did so in good faith. But I don't think as a left we can allow ourselves in the Labour Party to be defined by positions on internal matters. That doesn't mean we shouldn't engage with them. It doesn't mean we should sell out the membership or our principles, quite the reverse. But I think we need to not undersell ourselves, because it's only the left in the party that has the policy solutions which will really solve the crises that people face. A wealth tax, we've set out various types of it, a national care service run on the basis of the socialist founding principles of our National Health Service, a mass council house building programme, a £15 an hour minimum wage, statutory sick pay at real living wage levels, a socialist green industrial revolution creating hundreds of thousands of well-paid, secure, trade unionised jobs, extra legislation to really tackle all the discrimination in our society that minorities face. These are left ideas. We've got the ideas, we've got the courage to push them. You know, if the leadership won't step up to the plate and hold the Tories properly to account and set out practical policies which can speak to the concerns that tens of millions of people have in this country, then we will do so. That's what happened before, which resulted in Jeremy taking the leadership of the Labour Party, and that can happen again. So let's oppose the Tories with all our might, and let's set forward our ideas that can gain the support of the majority of the Labour Party, but even more importantly, gain mass support in the country, because they are the solutions to the problems that people face.
Thank you, Richard. Awesome as ever. So obviously I'm just going to be putting some questions to yourself and Rachel that we've had in from the audience. But before I do that, I just want to bring in Patrick Foley from Arise just to make some announcements. So Patrick, you want to come in with your announcements first?
Yeah, thanks for that, Nadia. Hi everyone, I'm Patrick. I'm an organiser for Arise and for the Labour Assembly Against Austerity. I just want to say thank you for everyone who's joined us today, and obviously thank you so much to Richard and Rachel for their contributions, highlighting the big challenges we face, the next steps for the left, and also those important victories we saw at conference. There's a lot of positives to take solace from us, I feel, listening to that, and I'm sure there's going to be many more to come. As many of you know, these events, initiatives that we put on are completely funded by your donations and the donations of everyone who takes part. So I just wanted to ask if you are able to just to donate £10 or whatever you can afford now, so that we can keep up our work, raising the voices from across our movement that are taking the fight directly to the Tories and building our movement within the party as well. The link to donate will be circulating in the chat on Zoom, and also if you're tuning in on YouTube, it should be posted in there now as well. So, you know, thanks again. Without your support, we wouldn't be able to do any of this. And I just want to also say a big thank to everyone who's donated to us in the past and helped us get to this point. I'd also like to mention our media partner, Labour Outlook. So many of you might know about Labour Outlook already. If you don't, then this is the perfect time to go and check them out. We've got articles from the Labour left, from the wider movement internationally, positive news and views from the left in general. There are articles from our speakers and chair tonight. I know that there's articles from Richard, Nadia and Rachel have recently been penned for Labour Outlook, so you've got to check them out as well. And finally, we've got a very busy schedule of events coming up, so I thought I'd just quickly touch through a few of them and get your diaries at the ready. So this Thursday, Arise is supporting Speaking Up for Palestine, the Next Steps After Conference. That's hosted by Labour and Palestine, and its speakers including Palestinian Ambassador Hussein Zomlot, Graham Morris MP, Gemma Bolton, who sits on the NEC with Nadia, and more great speakers to be confirmed. After the historic motion was passed at conference, this is a hugely important meeting and really sets out how we can hold on to that gain and despite Lisa Nandy's immediate rejection of it, how we can build on such a show of support for the Palestinian struggle. We also have system change, not climate change, coming up. That's taking place on October 14th. Again, the links will be posted in the chat for you. This is a special event taking place before COP26, and we're going to be joined by Becky Long-Bailey, Zara Sultana, and Scarlett Westbrook of Teach the Future, plus economist Grace Blakely. We'll be there to show our support for a Green New Deal and policies that tackle the climate crisis head on before the COP takes place. Arise is also supporting a celebration of Bolivia's victory over the far-right coup regime. That's 1 year on from the historic election victory. That takes place on Monday, October 18th, and will feature live links directly from Bolivia. We're being joined by Jeremy Corbyn, Claudia Turbet-Deloff from Wipalas Across the World, and Bolivia-based journalist Oli Vargas. So do check that out. And finally, this one's a little bit further ahead, but it'd be great to have you booked in already. And that is the Labour Assembly Against Austerity conference taking place on November 27th. It's called Resisting the Tory Offensive, Winning an Agenda for People and Planet. It's an all-day event with workshops and different sessions, and we already have speakers including Jeremy Corbyn, John McDonnell, Bel Rabiradi, and a range of movement speakers joining us as well. So you can find out more about that. Again, the links are in the chat. Book your place in there. Spread the word. Let's try and make all of these events as big as possible. So thank you again for taking part. Thank you, Nadia, for your chairing, and back over to you.
Thanks, Paddy. Okay, so I'm going to go to a few. There's 4 questions I've got for Rachel and Richard. So I'll just read through them and then give you time to come in. So obviously, I think you've touched on this a little bit, but throughout the conference, we've talked about how the left was winning on policy, and we were able to push back on the electoral college system, although it may come back. I think there was definitely evidence that the trade unions were not happy with that. But why do you think there was the difference in our success in policy versus fighting the rule changes? And how do you think we need to deal with the rule changes that have come up? And Rachel, you might want to come back in on that one. The gulf between the membership and the Labour leadership was made clear by the range of progressive policy motions passed at conference. While Keir seems set on a return to Tory-like policies, how can we effectively turn our commitments to a Green New Deal and Palestine into concrete Labour Party policy? Richard, you might want to answer this one. How can we as members work with the Socialist Campaign Group of MPs to put forward an alternative to the Tory hard right agenda and Starmer's abject refusal to take a stance, lack of opposition? And why stay in the Labour Party when so many officers, activists and even MPs are being threatened with suspension, and when local regional bureaucrats rig meetings and elections? So who wants to come in? Can I just say, obviously as a grassroots voice member on the NEC, we do feedback these things to Keir directly, and in relation to the increase in percentage, and it's really interesting, Richard, to verbalise that it actually doesn't make a massive difference. One of the things that I particularly said to Keir was his job is to convince Labour voters why they need a Labour government, and those rule changes that he would put forward, that was referred to as Keir's package, was not going to do that, and there was just no response at all to any of that. There's this myth that somehow those rule changes are going to make us more electable. And so I'd be really interested to hear your view on that, Richard, as well. So who wants to come in first, Rachel or Richard? Rachel.
Give Richard a break. So yes, there was a real difference, but the left won the policy and was narrowly defeated on most of the rule changes, not all of them. But and I think that reflects what we've been saying earlier, is that actually the current leadership can't win any of the arguments. So it focused on what it really wanted to do, which was shutting down the arguments, because whenever it allows debate to flourish and the membership to grow, the current Tory B team, as it was referred to in an earlier webinar with Arise, hasn't got the answer. So what do we do about it? I think the lessons come from how we defeated the Electoral College. I mean, they were pretty smart. They put in, 80 pages of rule changes that came to the NEC. I think it was 50 in CAC 1. It was absolutely at the last minute, and we weren't able to focus on all 80 pages to try and defeat them. But once again, I think the trade unions came to Labour's rescue, as they did in the days of Blair, who would have rather gone much further in removing the trade unions from the Labour Party, and having an entirely neoliberal party rather than just a neoliberal government and leadership. So we have to learn from the successes that we had. So the vote against David Evans was absolutely unprecedented. No one can remember a General Secretary ever going to a card vote like that, having 40% of the conference vote against them. We were able to build support for that, and I didn't think it would even come to conference. And so we need to build on those alliances. We need to work together as a left across constituency organisations, the campaign group of MPs and the left trade unions, because we can win the arguments. In terms of future rule changes. We have to defeat the Electoral College coming back. We have to lobby our NEC representatives, and that means not just the reliable grassroots 5 or those from, you know, ASLEF, Unite and TSSA, who we know are completely reliable, and FBU, sorry, don't want to leave anyone out, but there are 9 constituency representatives. They should be representing constituencies. There are 13 trade union representatives. If you're in USDOR, in Unison, in GMB, you know, need to be lobbying your NEC representatives. And it's a long fight. So it brings you on to the other answers to the other questions. You know, we're not going to have a Labour Party conference again for a year. The left still has the answers on policy, and we can do so much locally, regionally, nationally, if we all work together. You know, for example, you know, just at our Labour Party meeting last week, we were talking about how we defend against cuts to special needs education locally. I'm sure that's the same case across the country. The Labour left is the one in its communities, defending its communities, building the necessary alliances, and that's what we have to sort of replicate at every level. And we stay in the Labour Party because we can do that, and we can bring that political pressure to bear.
Thank you, Rachel. Richard?
I glanced down some of the comments and questions just a few minutes ago. One I particularly liked was somebody who echoed the film Jaws when he said, we're going to need a bigger tent. He says that we need a tent 4 times as big for the left fringes next time, because the world transformed tent, whilst big, wasn't quite big enough. I think that's a very good idea. I understand people sometimes feel despondent. And so in relation to the question, or how can we say left members should stay when the right wingers are treating left members so badly and threatening them, I'm afraid, what do we expect? It's not right, it's not fair. I and others will continue to speak out against it, but we shouldn't expect fair or decent treatment from the establishment, wherever it's found. We shouldn't expect fair or decent treatment from the Labour right. I mean, there are plenty of people whose politics is little more sophisticated than reliving kind of 80s cosplay and this kind of fantasies of playing some role in some kind of anti-Trotskyist purge, you know. And they've gone so far down this rabbit hole that they don't know what a Trotskyist actually is. And anybody who's on the left at all is somehow a communist, somehow a Stalinist, somehow a Trotskyist. So I don't expect anything else from these political forces. The question is, how do we respond? The Labour Party is a contested space created by the working class. It's a contested space. It always has been. The trade unions created by the working class are contested spaces. They always have been. Now, if I were a member of a union that had just elected a right-wing general secretary, you know, would I leave that trade union? Would I say, oh, let's form a new trade union with 12 workers as its members tomorrow instead? No, you'd carry on organising in your branches, organising at the conference in order to force that union, despite its leadership, to adopt progressive policies. And you'd have a real eye to the next election for the leader of that union. So in the same way that's a contested space, you know, all trade unions are contested spaces, so is the same with the Labour Party. But we shouldn't expect to be treated well. And can I just say the Labour Party in its history has done far worse things. I'm not trying to let people off the hook here, the leadership off the hook, or some of the bureaucrats or right wingers off the hook. Has done far worse things. You look at the war in Iraq, you look at expulsions in the past, you know, the Labour Party has done worse things in the past, and we still ended up with Jeremy as leader of the Labour Party, with John McDonnell as Shadow Chancellor and Dan Abbott as Shadow Home Secretary, and the Labour Party was transformed irreversibly, I'd say. Yes, we're not in as a strong position as we were between 2015 and 2019, but we're in a much stronger position as a left, I think, than we've ever been in the history of the, apart from whilst Jeremy was leading. So we can build upon that. We can build upon that. What the conference shows is that the left can win. And I've always thought, you know, whenever friends of mine, I understand how despondent and demoralised they feel, say, you know, I've left the Labour Party, I feel really bad. I want to teach them. I want to teach the right wingers a lesson. So I've left. Well, when you leave, you do teach the right wingers a lesson. It's carry on doing what you're doing, because the more bad behaviour you engage in, the more left wingers will leave, and the better position you'll be in as a result. So let's teach them a lesson. Let's teach them a lesson that the left won't give up. Let's encourage people to rejoin. Let's encourage them to be part of the fight. The policy votes and the defeat of the Electoral College show that that's possible. The campaign group has 34 MPs, and there are other obviously great MPs who aren't in the campaign group on various issues, progressive issues, do a great job. And in a time of crisis, I think more and more people are turning to left ideas. So I'm not despondent at all, but have I missed a question there, Nadia? I've just gone on a rant about how people shouldn't give up. Have I missed one of the questions you asked me?
I think one of the things that was specifically asked was, how can members work with the Socialist campaign group of MPs?
Yeah, well, that's an important question, because the whole purpose of the campaign group, it's not just to be a club for the left MPs in Parliament, as nice as that is. It's meant to be the bridge between the left in Parliament and the left in the CLPs, between the left in Parliament and the left in trade unions, the left in Parliament and the left in social movements such as the anti-war movement, the anti-racist movement, etc. So what we're going to be doing as a campaign group is going across the country with seminars, rallies, meetings for Labour Party members, both online and in person, pushing some of the kind of policies that we set out in our 10-point programme, which we suggested that Keir should adopt as we went into conference. So we'll be going out on that basis. So campaign group MPs, contact them individually, are always very happy to get out and about across the country, to address your CLP meeting, address your picket line, march with you. I was on the People's Assembly against austerity demonstration against the Tory conference in Manchester yesterday. We're very happy to do that. And I do think that our organisational ability to act as effectively as we would like has been restricted, obviously, by COVID. And in that context, it's been much easier for people to feel they're alone, feel demoralised. And that's why the fringe meetings at conference and why the organising for conference, which saw us win all those policy votes, was so relevant and so uplifting. So we're very much moving into a time when it's easier for us to organise than it has been for the last 18 months, and when we can all support each other, show solidarity to each other much more effectively, much more clearly, and draw strength from each other as well. The Socialist Campaign Group obviously also has a email newsletter, which I encourage people to sign up to. The details are on the Socialist Campaign Group Twitter account. There must be near on 20,000 members who have signed up to that. You know, that's, you know, it's significant, so you can keep up to date with the work the Social Campaign Group is doing there. But involve us in your campaigns, involve us in your protests, you know, invite us to your CLP events, and as we're going to be hosting events across the country. So let's work in partnership, the left in Parliament, the left in our grassroots party membership, to take things forward, and not forgetting, of course, our fantastic left CLP reps on the NEC as well, who do such a great job. It's probably the least rewarding job in politics, I think, and maybe Nadia will agree with me on that.
Definitely, I can vouch for that. So brilliant. Thank you both for your contributions tonight, and I'd like to thank everybody for participating in the event. Obviously, there's been lots of links that have been put in the chat tonight, so please do look at those. The donations are really welcome. Obviously, Arise put on these events, and a lot of it's done through volunteers. So the more you can donate, the more that they can do. Obviously, just to make you aware, obviously there's the Labour Outlook. There's future events coming up. There's going to be a climate change discussion with Rebecca Long-Bailey, Zara Sultana, and international guests next Thursday. So keep an eye out for that. And just because we know the right will be watching, and maybe Keir will have a look in. As a granddaughter of a Liverpool docker, I think it's really important that I say this. Obviously, we were all extremely outraged about the article that Keir put in The Sun. But I just want to say this, you know, according to comms news consumption survey, only 20% of some readers use it for their political views. 95% of those readers use radio, TV, and even social media. So there can never be any excuse for writing in that rag. Please never do it again. It's outrageous that a Labour leader did that. And I just want to say justice for the 97. So I'm going to close the event on that. Obviously, we've now got to build the resistance within and beyond Labour. Please make sure you are engaged in your trade union. There's lots of opportunities there, as you've heard. Unison, their Labour Left Link is coming up. They've got some elections, so look out for those. And if you all remember, please vote for the Left delegates. So I'd just like to thank everybody for your time tonight. Thank you.